Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Today, we want to talk a little bit about how the world has changed. In 365 days, yes, just 1 year, on May 25th, the world changed forever. Because that was the day that the convicted violent felon George Floyd was being arrested by several officers, including Officer Derek Chauvin, someone that he knew. And Officer Chauvin used Minnesota Police Department procedures to hold down George Floyd, and George Floyd died. Now, since that time, Officer Chauvin has been convicted of manslaughter and other charges, but the world has irrevocably changed in so many ways for so many people. We're going to speak about that. But first, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you're seeing the channel, we welcome you and we thank you for joining us. And we want you to know that we do long-form political commentary here. In addition, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, DLive. In fact, on all social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to reach out to you through your text and chat and even in phone calls from anywhere in the world to speak with us about the issues that matter to you that are affecting all of us, because we believe in First Amendment free speech. And we invite you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. to join us to engage in free speech and to share your thoughts about the issues as they affect us all. We hope to see you this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now to the issue at hand today. Violence, crime, and death. These are big issues, and they are affecting not just the United States. As we see protests and events happening across the world, this is happening everywhere. We're seeing this in Great Britain, in France. We're seeing this across the United States. The ramifications of the death of George Floyd has hit the world hard. Now, it started because in 2020, after the initial fear and terror of COVID-19 resulted in businesses being shut down across the world, in people being locked in their homes in solitary confinement for weeks on end, in 2020, we finally got out of our homes and were able to start a semblance of life all over again, although the fear of COVID was omnipresent for every person. In that environment of pent-up anger, fear, frustration, there was the George Floyd event. And that resulted in protests. Many protests. Protests that continue to go on to this day. It led to autonomous zones that exist to this day, violating every law on the local, state, and federal level. And it has led to George Floyd being a martyr for the progressive socialist ideology of critical race theory. And today we see people looking back on George Floyd as a man that he never was. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's look at this. Right now we see in America that the question of violence is deeply rooted in the conversation at this time. As we see here,
4,000 more people shot and killed by guns in 2020 compared to the year before. Is there a crime problem in this country?
Well, I would say certainly there is a guns problem, and that's something the president would say. And there are communities where local violence and community violence is an issue. And that's one of the reasons that we have proposed and now are implementing funding for community violence prevention programs across the country. I will say that we don't often highlight, and you just gave me the opportunity to, the fact that between mass shootings that get a lot of attention, that we lower the flags, there are hundreds, thousands of people who lose their lives. And that's one of the reasons the president will continue to advocate for the Senate passing universal background checks, but also advocate for actions in states where we have seen the greatest level of activism over the past several years.
And so what do we see? What is the press secretary, Jen Psaki, talking about? What is she speaking about there? She was asked a very specific question. What about the violence? The violence that started roughly on May 26 and continued for 365 days. The violence that we see now in America, an increase on average of 40% more violent crime and murder in almost every major city in America and in many of our towns and villages. What is happening? We've seen less police, which has resulted in exponential increases in violence, in more crime, more murders than we've seen ever before. What is happening in America? What has led to this? And why is it that the White House, why is it that Jen Psaki, the press secretary for the White House, won't talk about it? She won't address Chicago or Baltimore or St. Louis. She won't talk about the daily expansion of violence and murder and gun violence that is happening in these cities, much of it happening because of gangs and drugs. She won't talk about the fact that each of these cities, almost every one of the Democratic progressive strongholds in the nation, have every single law and every single restriction on the Second Amendment that is being proposed by the Biden administration, that's being proposed by Democrats in Congress. And in each and every one of these cases, it's resulted in no benefit to the public. In fact, as we speak today, earlier today, we see that there was breaking news, that there was a drive-by shooting caught on live TV at George Floyd Square, an autonomous zone that was created shortly after the death of George Floyd, something that violates the local, state, and federal laws, and lawlessness continues unabated. Even as we see on this day of celebration for progressives and socialists, we see that there were at least 30 shots fired, caught live. And we know that was 30 shots. It was from the AP Global Media Services under a reporter by the name of Philip Crowther, who reported hearing as many as 30 gunshots about a block east of the intersection that he was taping at. A window storefront was shot out, and police believe there was an individual that did not die but was in critical condition shortly after the event. And Mr. Crowther goes on to say that very quickly things got back to normal. People were here who spent a significant amount of time, the organizers, were running around asking, does anyone need a medic? It seems like there's no injuries. But the key word here is, this is normal. How is that normal? The fact is that we've now come to a point where we see autonomous zones in America, and violence, extreme violence, drive-by shootings are considered par for the course. In fact, we've seen a lot of destruction and violence and death, all of it attributable to the events after George Floyd's death. And that's sad. And we need to think about that. Because while some are elevating George Floyd to a level of sainthood that does not reflect his life and the way he lived it, we should also reflect on what are the consequences of the way some people have reacted. We've seen in 2020 multiple autonomous zones created or attempted. We've seen riots encompassing cities from each coast and across the nation. Were it not for the George Floyd riots, we would not see the autonomous zone in Portland. We would not see the riots in Seattle. We would not see the autonomous zones in Austin, in Colorado, Boulder, in New York City, in Brooklyn, and so many other places, Rochester riots across this nation. And this is part of the legacy of George Floyd. Not that he just died, not that because he died, because he was black and he died at the hands of a white officer, that some people have decided, well, that was the example of racism that crossed the line. It doesn't matter that this has happened before, that in the line of duty, officers doing the exact same procedures as Derek Chauvin Some individuals did die, some didn't. Some were white, some weren't. And now, everything is about race. Everything is about, racism. We see critical race theory in our schools, being taught to our children, being promoted in our movies and songs, and being told to us by the major news media as if it were a norm. In fact, we had to stop and think about this for a moment. Earlier today, we left this tweet as we said, "Only in America can a career criminal, high on drugs, become the inspiration for destruction in the billions. Arson, treason, and murder followed by waves of hyper-racism, yet praised like a saint. Waiting for Oxford, the Oxford Dictionary, to redefine the word hero." Remembering George Floyd. And if we remember George Floyd in context, the results of his death, the riots, the protests that were created, this is what we get. These are the scenes taken from NBC News, from CNN, USA Today, Variety, Vanity Fair, and The Guardian, New York Times, Indian Press, Sky News out of Australia, National Review, Rolling Stone. In other words, everyone knows this. Everyone reported it. And even the furthest left-leaning individuals cannot deny the violence, the absolute violence that has resulted because of the rioting. Now we must ask ourselves, is this appropriate? Was it worth it? Was it worth the widespread vandalism, looting, $2 billion in damage and destruction in 140 cities just in the United States, not counting the exported violence into countries like Great Britain and France, who have now rejected this? The question we have to ask ourselves is, what happened? What's going on? A violent criminal died, and that is sad. We will not say it wasn't. And it did seem like it was manslaughter. In fact, that's what a court found. But we have to ask the question, everything that happened after that moment, was it worth it? Was it justified? Did George Floyd become a martyr because he died? Nancy Pelosi seems to think so. And this is an issue we've been talking about for quite some time. In fact, if we go back, we can see for many, many months, from Ricardo Munoz and Hakeem Littleton talking about the donations in the 2020 election to release rioters and felons from prisons, the 100 days of racism and gender identity politics since the Biden administration took place, knife fighting and Antifa and the autonomous zones that continue to exist at this time, and many, many other stories and many aspects of these stories. We have to ask ourselves, has it been worth it? Is this the legacy that we want, not only for George Floyd, but for America, for the world? Is violence the only answer? Because that is the answer we keep seeing over and over again. And are we appreciating properly what happened and how it happened? Let's remember that after George Floyd died, there were autonomous zones, centers and areas of our nation in the United States that were captured by individuals holding American citizens hostage, rejecting every local, state, and federal law. And these events, these autonomous zones, led to people dying. There were riots across the nation, individuals burning down cities and buildings. And there were deaths, a lot of deaths. In fact, we saw individuals, like in this case, retired St. Louis Captain David Dorn, who was killed on August 27th during a riot. We saw individuals like at the Seattle Autonomous Zone, where a 16-year-old boy was killed, a 14-year-old boy was seriously injured from shootings as the mob rule in that autonomous zone led to violence. We saw that an 8-year-old girl who was killed, an 8-year-old girl, because a mother made a wrong turn and turned into an autonomous zone in Atlanta. We saw that BLM members and the progressive socialist left celebrated the death of a 24-year-old mom, a mother whose only crime was that she decided that all lives matter, not just a specific ethnic group, not just people with brown skin, but everyone. And their answers were horrific, to say the least, that this racist racial is pushing daisies and the streets are a little safer. How disgusting. They were individuals who said, I can't feel bad for a racist who used a racial slur, her slur being to say all lives matter. How racially insensitive. And now she'll have plenty of time to think about the horrible actions of saying all lives matter. How terrible to say something like that, to believe that all people should be able to live free and without fear of violence. Another one says, good riddance to another racist for saying that all lives matter. Not just black lives, not just Hispanic lives, not just Asian lives, all lives. How terrible a thought. This is part of the legacy, and we're not done, because going into September of 2020, we saw even more and more violent actions. Antifa, a group that Democrats absolutely denied the existence of, given all the evidence that proves and has proven for years that they exist, they deny it and denied it until a self-avowed member of Antifa killed a man in cold blood just because he didn't agree. And then we had, of course, the most recently, in this process that has not stopped to this day, back on March 11th, at the George Floyd Autonomous Zone. What did we see? Another man died. Another man was shot. And police were not allowed to try and save his life. And his mother had to ask the question. Emez Wright, the aunt of this man who was gunned down in the zone over the weekend. She had to ask a question. Police were not allowed to get into that area. He was carried out outside of the zone of George Floyd Square. It was made clear law enforcement was not welcome to penetrate that zone, which is an atrocity because his life was taken, and I mean, who knows whether or not he would have survived had things been different. That is troubling. And then, again, that brings us to today, May 25th, 2021, where a man, again, was shot. That there were 30 shots of a drive-by shooting at that same autonomous zone for George Floyd. This is the real legacy of George Floyd. Violence, destruction, the racist actions of critical race theory, defining a group of people by the color of their skin that they're born with. This has been horrendous. And we're going down this path all while cheering a violent convicted felon, a drug addict, an individual who was not a benefit to the community. Yes, we are sad to see that a human life has gone. We are upset that a police officer made that happen. We agree with the charge of manslaughter. But that does not excuse, it does not justify the legacy that we must all now live with. A legacy of violence, of destruction, of hate. That's the thing that we're not seeing. And the more that we see people around the world celebrate and laud a flawed individual, a violent individual, an individual that no one was celebrating during his life. They're celebrating what they can do because of his death. He is a tool, a means to an end, and a means to allow certain political organizations and quasi-political organizations to gain power over the guilt of the death of an individual that was sad but not tragic. It was actually something to be expected, if we have to be honest, and we should be. Should George Floyd be dead today? Maybe not. Do we think that George Floyd would have become a saint if he had not died? That he would have changed his violent ways? That he would have stopped using and selling drugs? Unlikely, if we're honest. He had no intention to do any of that. He wasn't on his path to enlightenment, from what we can see. But we have seen that his death has not added to enlightenment for anyone. It has added to the misery of the world. It has added violence. It has added destruction. It has added death. The legacy of George Floyd is not something to celebrate. The death of George Floyd is not something to celebrate. The consequences of his death are not things to celebrate. There is no positive here. And the longer that we fool ourselves into thinking that, well, there is some good out of this, is the longer that we lie and the longer that we wallow in this misery. You may disagree with this. You may think we're wrong. You may think that there's such a great positive in critical race theory. I'd ask you to reread critical race theory. I'd like you to think about the fact that critical race theory demands that a group of people be persecuted, be subjected to considerations of being less than human, less than worthy of life for the mere fact that they were born with a different skin color. That's not a positive. That right now in America, there are autonomous zones, about half a dozen of them, that exist at this moment, where no law exists except the law of the mob, that human beings are dying, black, white, and otherwise, in these zones because of this violence, that there are thousands of people who have had their lives irrevocably damaged and harmed for decades to come. And that has nothing to say about what's going to be happening to our children who are being taught that this is normal, that once there's a drive-by shooting, just go about your day as normal. Something that many kids in Baltimore, in Chicago, in St. Louis, they may have known that before, but the fact that it continues is not a reason to be celebrating. In fact, we should be looking at what are the root causes. What is the true problem here? And it's not the color of someone's skin. It's not institutional racism, an excuse to allow one group of people to take power over another group of people. You may disagree. You may hate that we've said this. But we ask you to put aside your feelings, those emotions that many people are using to manipulate you, and consider honestly, is this the legacy we truly want? Is this the way that we should be lauding the death of a man? Is this the way that we change our country for the better? Is it truly? Because we haven't seen a single element of improvement in this process. And there's no reason to believe that that will happen in the future. Either way, we look forward to seeing your comments, to hear what you have to say about this. And we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to talk to us, to tell us directly what you think about the issues that are affecting us all. Until then, we do thank you.